Hi guys, it's Michelle. Happy Halloween. So today's video is going to be all about the scariest things that have happened on Halloween in the past. And honestly, there are so many things. Obviously, this is like a spooky holiday in general, but there have been a lot of really terrifying true crime cases that occurred on Halloween. So without further ado, let's get into them, and I hope you guys have a happy and safe Halloween. Alright, so the first case that we're going to be talking about is the disappearance of Cindy Song. So this happened in 2001 when Cindy Song, who was a 21-year-old Penn State University student that happened to disappear without a trace after a night out with her friends, leaving behind a trail of questions. So like I said, Cindy went to Penn State University in Pennsylvania, and she was a very lively student. She was known for having a super bubbly and sweet personality, and she was deeply involved in both her academic and social life. At the time of Cindy's disappearance, she was actually living at an apartment off campus, and she was studying integrative arts and had big aspirations for a very successful career. So on Halloween night of 2001, Cindy and her two friends went to a local bar called Players Nightclub to celebrate the holiday. Cindy went dressed as a bunny, wearing a white skirt and a pink shirt and bunny ears. The three friends spent the night drinking and dancing and just having a great time. Cindy's friends later reported that by the end of the night, she seemed to be in high spirits and it didn't seem like anything was off or bothering her. The group ended up leaving the bar around 2 a.m. on November 1st, and one of Cindy's friends actually drove her home and dropped her off at her apartment at around 4 o'clock in the morning. The friend watched her walk towards the building, and assuming that she made it in safely, that was the last time anyone ever saw Cindy Song. Cindy's roommates started to become pretty concerned when Cindy didn't answer any phone calls, and she obviously wasn't home, and then she also failed to attend classes in the following days. So on November 4th of 2001, Cindy was reported missing. Her apartment showed no signs of forced entry or any struggle, and Cindy's purse, cell phone, and some of the items from her costume were missing, but her keys and other personal belongings were left behind, suggesting that she had planned to return. A pair of fake eyelashes that she wore with her costume was at the apartment, so she did end up going home at 4 o'clock in the morning and getting inside safely when her friend dropped her off. This is where things get a little confusing because a lot of people wanted to speculate that maybe Cindy had been abducted while heading into her apartment, but it appeared that she had been in her apartment since returning home from the bar, so that was the part that was always confusing. But her friends and family were pretty adamant that Cindy wouldn't have left her house after the fact that she got home at 4 o'clock in the morning, and since there was no indication that there were any struggle or forced entry, it just seemed like it made more sense for her to have gotten abducted prior to going into her apartment. The case went pretty cold for about 2 years. There was no evidence found. No one ever found Cindy or any of her other parts of her costume, cell phone, nothing. And things took a bit of a turn in 2003 when a man named Paul Weekly, who was an inmate in a Pennsylvania prison, made a very shocking statement. He claimed that Cindy Song had been abducted by a man named Hugo Selinski, who was a man that had a criminal history and who had been charged of multiple homicides. According to Paul Weekly, Hugo Selinski and an accomplice kidnapped Cindy, mistaking her for a prostitute, and killed her. And Paul Weekly's story also detailed how he buried Cindy on his property. So in 2003, authorities obviously searched Hugo Selinski's property, and they did indeed find human remains, but none of them belonged to Cindy. The remains belonged to two people named Michael Karofsky. He was a local pharmacist, and his girlfriend, and they were believed to have been murdered by Hugo Selinski, but despite having this horrific discovery, the police were never able to link Hugo Selinski to Cindy Song's case. But ultimately, this case is completely unsolved, which is just really sad and scary. I just think it's interesting because it does seem like Cindy returned to the apartment at some point in the night, just with the fake eyelashes on the counter. Like, it just doesn't make sense. But ultimately, a lot of people think that she was just abducted by a complete stranger, or some people think that she was lured out of her apartment by perhaps someone that she knew. And either way, it's a pretty terrifying thing, and it just shows that Halloween night can be a very dangerous holiday for a lot of people. And this next story has to do with the dangers of Halloween as well, and it is about a man named Carl Jackson. So Carl Jackson was a 21-year-old data entry clerk from the Bronx, New York. On Halloween night of 1998, he was driving with his girlfriend and his girlfriend's son, and they ended up encountering a group of teenagers who were throwing eggs at passing cars, which again is a pretty common Halloween prank. I mean, I think it's kind of more old-timey. Do people still throw eggs at people? Like, I don't know. When I was a child, we like forked someone's house, like just put a bunch of forks. I don't know. We did TPing. We never really did egging. I thought we were all taught egging was like kind of mean. But an egg ended up hitting Carl's car, so he decided to stop and confront the pranksters and hoping to put an end to the incident because they were just like teenagers. He probably assumed they were pretty harmless. So he got out of the car, warned the teenagers, and then walked back to the car and drove away. But sadly, one of the teenagers in the group, 17-year-old Curtis Sterling, took Carl's warning a bit as a personal attack, and he ended up following Carl's car and eventually caught up with him. As Carl exited his car, Curtis Sterling took out a gun and killed Carl by shooting him in the head, which is just an insane escalation from what seemed like a harmless like teenage prank on Halloween to this very sad and senseless death of this man. I feel like it just goes to show you that I feel like a lot of people, I don't know, your parents growing up maybe also said this to you, that Halloween is always like kind of a dangerous holiday. Like, I don't like going out on Halloween, just because there is a lot of crazy people outside. Like, your parents told you that for a reason. They're kind of correct. It's just crazy to me because I feel like there's so many kids in my neighborhood when I was a teenager that would have been doing the same thing, like egging people's cars, just being assholes. But they're teenagers and you don't expect them to follow you home and kill you. That's pretty fucking scary. Again, that a teenager was even able to obtain a gun, but that's a whole nother issue. And Curtis Sterling is still rotting in prison, and every October, Carl Jackson's mother would send a note, would send him a Halloween card that said, "I'm glad you're still there." And honestly, good for her, because that's truly just heartbreaking and such a frustrating, senseless crime, and it's just really disturbing. All right, the next case is very tragic and honestly sort of similar in the sense of I do feel like everyone is a little bit more on guard on Halloween because I don't know if it's so much anymore. I feel like this was very like late 90s, early 2000s vibes, at least in my experience. But I do feel like everyone was really on guard about like troublemakers on Halloween. And this is all about the tragic death of Yoshihiro Hatori. So Yoshihiro Hatori was a 16-year-old Japanese exchange student, and he was known by his friends and family as a very warm-hearted boy. He was very energetic and joyful. In August of 1992, he traveled to Baton Rouge, Louisiana to live with the Haymaker family, and they were hosting him as part of an exchange program. He always had a really big fascination with America and particularly jazz music, so he always dreamed of going to Louisiana. Yoshihiro really adapted well to his life in Louisiana. He was very happy there. He loved his host family, and he immersed himself in the American high school culture, and he was just really happy to be there. On October 17th of 1992, Yoshihiro and his friend Webb Haymaker, the 16-year-old son of Yoshihiro's host family, they had planned to attend a Halloween party that was hosted by a classmate in a neighborhood that was unfamiliar to them. Yoshihiro was dressed in a white tuxedo, which was inspired for his Halloween costume, which was John Travolta's look in Saturday Night Fever. So Yoshihiro and Webb just set out with high spirits and were excited to join their classmates in some Halloween festivities. The boys ended up mistakenly arriving at the home of Rodney and Bonnie Pears, a house that resembled their intended destination, but ultimately they were at the wrong house. They knocked on the door, and unaware of the switch up, Rodney and Bonnie were concerned with these strange people that were just showing up at their house, which is weird to me because they're clearly like 16 years old. I don't know why they were so like terrified. And they reportedly felt threatened. In a panic, Bonnie closed the door and ran to her husband, telling him that there was a suspicious man outside. And Rodney believed that his family was in danger. He grabbed his revolver and went to the front door. And as Yoshihiro and Webb were walking towards their car, he shot and killed Yoshihiro. Which, this is just tragic because this kid literally was a kid not doing anything, and this man just shot and killed him. Pretty absurd. But in May of 1993, he was acquitted of manslaughter because while his actions were tragic, they apparently fell within the scope of Louisiana's self-defense laws. And the acquittal was met with outrage in Japan because Yoshihiro's family felt that their justice had been denied, and many Americans as well voiced their frustration that due to the very lax gun laws, this man was just able to murder this kid. This became a very heightened debate, and it was really sad because his dad spoke about this in 2012 and said, "Sometimes I feel like he's still in America and someday he'll come back home," I say to myself, and that's literally so sad. And it's just heartbreaking and really, really scary that this kid just pulled up thinking he was going to a Halloween party and was murdered. All right, the last story that we're going to be talking about is one of the fucking craziest things that I have ever heard. Insane and just so horrific. And it is all about the Candyman Killer. So this is a story of Ronald Clark O'Brien, who infamously was later dubbed as the Candyman Killer, but he was a 30-year-old optician living in Deer Park, Texas. He was married to Diane O'Brien and had 2 children, Timothy, who was 8 years old, and Elizabeth, who was 5 years old. And on the outside, it appeared that he was very normal. He attended church regularly, he had a steady job, and yet this man had a very interesting facade. He was in deep financial debt. He was in about $100,000 worth of debt, and he was really struggling to make ends meet. So he ended up having a lot of issues maintaining employment. He was fired from over 21 jobs over the years, and he was currently on the verge of losing his job as an optician due to suspected theft. In early 1974, he added $10,000 policies on both Timothy and Elizabeth. And in the weeks leading up to Halloween, he added an extra $20,000 policy on each child, totaling to around $60,000 in life insurance on each child by Halloween night. So on Halloween night of 1974, Ronald took his children trick-or-treating in Pasadena, Texas, accompanied by his neighbor Jim Bates and Bates's 2 children. During their route, Ronald reportedly handed out pixie sticks, which was a popular candy at the time, and he passed them out to each child, including his own. Timothy ate the pixie stick immediately and complained about the candy being bitter, so that led Brian to offer him some Kool-Aid to help wash it down. Within minutes, Timothy began to suffer very intense symptoms of poisoning, convulsing, and vomiting, and Ronald called an ambulance, and Timothy was taken to the hospital, but he ultimately succumbed to the effects of what later was proven to be a cyanide poisoning within the hour. So in the immediate aftermath, the police actually initially considered that someone else was distributing the poisoned candy to harm the local children, but as they investigated, the inconsistencies within Ronald O'Brien's story led them to suspect that he maybe was more than a grieving parent. Authorities found it pretty strange that none of the other pixie sticks were tampered with, and that Ronald O'Brien was the one who had distributed this particular candy. When police questioned him, he ended up claiming he didn't know which house the pixie sticks came from, which led them on a pretty long investigation, trying to follow the route of this neighborhood to see if there were any leads or, evidence of someone who was passing out this specific candy. When they looked a little further into Ronald O'Brien's background, they discovered that he had just taken out the insurance policies on his children's life, and obviously that seemed a little bit suspicious. So the police called his insurance company, and he was seemingly very eager to collect the payout from Timothy's death, which is just a strange thing that you consider when it's your child that just died. In addition to that, Ronald had been asking around about cyanide, inquiring about lethal doses, and even attempted to buy some from a chemical company. He obviously eventually managed to obtain the cyanide, which later he used to lace the pixie sticks. Ronald O'Brien was arrested on November 5th of 1974, just days after Timothy's death, and during his trial, the prosecutors painted a picture of a man who was willing to murder his own child for financial gain, which is just sick. and also true, clearly. The evidence presented showed that he had meticulously planned out a crime, expecting that Timothy's death would appear as some random Halloween incident. So obviously he thought that he would have gotten away with it. His wife ended up testifying against him and was obviously distraught and heartbroken over the death of her child. And he ended up being found guilty of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder for the other children that he tried to poison with the pixie sticks. And on June 3rd of 1975, he was sentenced to death. He spent 10 years on death row before he was ultimately executed on March 31st of 1984. At 39 years old, he obtained the nickname the Man Who Killed Halloween, and a lot of people also referred to him as the Candyman Killer. And honestly, this story is just so sick, but it also really got people nervous about what people could be putting in their children's Halloween candy. Like, obviously, I feel like you hear about, like, razor blades and crazy shit like that. But honestly, the fact that anyone is allowed, like, I just feel like trick-or-treating is so out of style. I would be scared to trick-or-treat or let my child trick-or-treat, because that is just... You don't actually know what's in the candy. There are ways to seal that shit up and make it look like it's sealed. But the fact that this poor child was murdered by his own father just to take out a life insurance policy is fucking insane and just heartbreaking. But those are some of the true crime cases that have happened on Halloween that I found to be extra terrifying and really scary. So that is it for today's video. If you guys liked it, please give it a big thumbs up. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think of these cases, and I hope you guys have a really safe Halloween and fun. And yeah, but that is it. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, and subscribe to my videos every week, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.